Wonderful. So, welcome everyone to the Go Green webinar series. I am especially excited today to be joined by two of my most esteemed colleagues. We have Lucas Baratz and David Thickett, who are joining us today to talk about Work Package 2. Now, if you know anything about me, you know that this subject is particularly near and dear to my heart because climate control is something that we know is out of control and is also something that we can do a lot about. Now, in my personal experience talking with museums around the globe, the one question is always, is it safe to update climate control? We want to know the science behind what climate control impacts have on our collections. And today we're being joined by two of the most prestigious scientists from around the globe to tell us more about their research and about why this is safe to make updates. And we're going to learn a lot about some tools and also something called damage functions. And we're going to nerd out a
Mhm.
little bit on this with Dave, and I'm very excited. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn right over to him to tell us all about it. Dave, thanks for being here today.
Hi, everybody. Today, Lukash and myself are going to talk about the preventive conservation parts of Go Green. And those of you that have been to the previous webinars or looked at the website, and the website is up there if you want more details, know that we set ourselves a series of very optimistic objectives for this 4 year project. And when you think of green, it's quite a complex thing. And one of the things that we have managed to do, not myself or the other members of the team, is to really move towards consensus on what actually constitutes green conservation and 15 parameters for that, which we've already had a webinar on. And there are a number of aims, as I said. We know what the problems are, and we're really just going to talk about part of this. So, develop preventive conservation practices that are greener. Nothing is ever fully green, that's for sure. And with the green definition, we defined 15 parameters that we should think about as part of green. And sustainability is quite a complex issue. And if we look at something quite complex like a life cycle assessment for treatments of archaeological iron, and this is for a representative treatment of 1,000 objects through interventive treatments with alkaline disulfate, not DIT, some with sodium hydroxide or with targeted treatment, and then preventive conservation for display and storage for the next 20 years. And looking at the different factors under an LCA, you can see, with the exception of acidification, it's mainly the preventive conservation that's having those environmental impacts in the 20 years after the treatment. And one of the things that we've been looking at, and we've looked at really heavily in this work package, is the global warming potential. How much carbon dioxide and other gases are given off or are embedded in the buildings and materials that we're using. And as Caitlin says, this is certainly a significant problem, and it's beginning to affect us really badly, which you'll see almost everywhere on the news every few days. This is work that Lukash and Stefan Simon did, collecting the energy use statistics for over 200 museums and libraries and archives. We've added another 30 or 40 institutions to this, and you can see it's quite variable. Some of it is very high. Things like a hospital or a really high intensity factory would only be using as much energy per square meter per year as some of our museums. And the green bar along the bottom is what the Passive House Association recommend we'll need to get to achieve net zero, which many museums have as an objective. And you can see there's a real challenge there. Some of us have got a very long way to go. And the 5 or 6 that are below that 40 kilowatt hours per meter square per annum are actually low energy stores, all of them. Looking at the UK, because I know the institutions better, And I separated that data out between those that are mainly air conditioned, those that are mainly not. And you can see with a couple of exceptions, it's the air conditioning is what's using a lot of the energy, or is using a lot more of the energy than other approaches. And again, within the UK for the creative industry sector, the 8% of museums were using 41% or generating 41% of the carbon dioxide and other gases. So we had a big impact uh, compared to the rest of the sector. That has got slightly better. It's now 25%, but it's still only 8% of the things. So within Work Package 2, we've decided we'll focus on developing some tools that will help with the decision about whether I need to have air conditioning or can live with something that's lower carbon intensive or a mix with microclimates. And we're going to present 3 areas of work today. The first one is about damage functions. I'll talk about this in a lot more detail as we go along, but it's a way that relates chemical deterioration or deterioration to the environment in a mathematical way. And within the project, we're looking at glass, steel, paintings, and there was a lot of discussion about what materials we could look at, and obviously a lot of materials we're missing out. And we're gonna, by the end of September, have developed chemical damage functions for 2 types of glass, for 2 types of steel, have helped to better understand the chemical degradation of oil paintings. I'll show a couple of slides about that later. And the physical degradation, changes in relative humidity, mainly, and temperature for corroded glass. And what we'll generate is a series of spreadsheets that will allow you to put your own environmental data into this, because that's always the problem with this as well. What does that mean in my institution with my conditions? The second part I'll talk about is analysis of individual objects to see within a group of the same kind of material which individual objects are stable and which are unstable, and they can be very unstable and need tight environmental control. And this has already been done. We'll be looking at archaeological iron and copper alloys for 25 years. The British Museum was looking at the composition of stone 70 years ago for presence of soluble salts and clays. Within GoGreen, we've done some work on glass, which has been published, some work on stone, which again has been published, and ceramics. And we've already generated on Zenodo a series of detailed description statements for the methods to allow other people to go away and do this kind of analysis. And then Lukash will talk about the heavy website and developing some more models or calculators that you can put your data in to give an estimate for how bad an environment is going to be for different types of material. Heavy is already quite widely used, but Lukash's team is going to generate the additional functions on the left-hand side. Okay, so talking about metals and glass, they're both affected by relative humidity quite strongly, a little bit by temperature, but also quite strongly by pollutant gases. And this is a naturally ventilated building. The red is temperature, the blue is pale blue is relative humidity, the black is nitrogen dioxide, and you can see both the temperature, relative humidity, but also the gas levels move up and down quite a bit. And the traditional approach to this has been to set a range for the temperature and relative humidity and a value below which you want to keep the gas levels. And it's actually quite challenging with the information we have, some of which is contradictory, to choose what are appropriate values. And as I say, they change. And the way to do this would have been through chemical filtration, which puts a big resistance in the air path. So again, it's energy intensive along with the controlling temperature and relative humidity. But another approach is to consider equal damage, equal change. So we're taking the approach that conservation is managing change, and we don't need to meet every one of those targets because sometimes the NO2 is higher, but the RH is lower. And what we think we can do with this is to use it to assess an environment, either measured or modeled for a new building, before deciding on whether we need air conditioning or something less carbon intensive or enclosures. Just an example of an indoor damage function. There aren't many of these. There are lots of outdoor ones. This is one I was involved in developing, and we measured the copper corrosion rate at 6 sites over 3 years. They were naturally ventilated, so at periods that were very different, relative humidities, temperatures, and all those gas levels. And we got about 60 domains of data that we then looked at a mathematical averaging and regression and several different functions, and this was the one that gave us the better fit. And just a quick example of how we might traditionally use this. This is Queen Victoria spinning and looking after her happy pooch. And this was on loan, going to be on loan to Apsley House, very polluted. And there were 2 rooms it could go in, and we needed to decide which room would it go in and did it need a cover. And if we look at the temperature and relative humidity data that we've often got, the one was generally higher relative humidity and lower temperature. And from what you read about metal corrosion, you'd imagine that room B with the higher relative humidity would be more aggressive. We already had pollution data for those rooms. Feeding them into the damage functions showed us actually this was not correct. Room A is almost twice as aggressive, particularly over the period when the loan was proposed for. Caitlin's already mentioned about perhaps some healthy skepticism on what you need to know. We've done this work. We then want to test how good it is. So we did measurements again during the loan, and we've got what we predicted from the previous year's data. It's a different year's data. Things are a bit different. And the most important one on there is probably the grey thing for the copper, the on-guard, which is how we develop the damage functions. And there's not a bad correlation between the blue bar and the grey bar, as good as you could probably hope. And within the project, we've been testing predictions for stone with a method called acoustic emission. We're hopefully about to publish in the ICOM-CC testing the heavy restrained wood module with furniture and acoustic emission. And we've previously published testing the copper damage function with stores. This is a building we were going to convert into a store at West Park. It's an old kind of vehicle maintenance shed, I suppose is the word. Conversion's much better because we don't need tons of concrete and steel to build a new building. We just need to block up the windows, block up the doors, and modify some other things. And this is blocking the windows, blocking some of the doors. This is what the interior looks like and some of the principles about what we were doing. And before we built the store, we wanted to compare the conditions that the material was already being stored, and it was bought from several stores around the country, to what we predicted was going to be happening here. And this is predictions for cast bronze. Red is what we thought the new store was going to perform like. The 2 blue lines are 2 of the rooms where the material was, and the green line is actually a measurement of copper corrosion rate in there, not the damage function. And you can see it's fairly similar with them. Similarly for carbon steel. So as we were as confident as we could be without building the thing that it was going to be okay. And after we built it, we then did some measurements with measuring the copper tin corrosion rate, which would be the first thing that you saw, and predicting it with the measured environmental parameters and measuring it with actually a piece of copper tin and seeing how quickly it corroded. And again, we had good correlations, so we think that's okay. And if you want to use these, at the moment they live on our website, and Caitlin will put some of these links on there. Our website is terrible. So once you go there, you then need to go down to metals and it's the silver copper corrosion rate sheets, and there's instructions for that. They will be appearing on heavy at some point fairly soon. Okay, just want to talk about Sanders' work, and I'm glad Sanders in the audience for this. And that will not generate as a damage function. You need to be quite a long way along to get that. But Sanders has been looking at the chemical reactions occurring in oil paint, and as you can see, they're pretty complex. And what Sanders has been doing is really beginning to understanding better how these reactions are occurring and quantifying them. And he's done a couple of publications, one here, and then he's been using ATR, FTIR to look at some of the processes and get the rates of what's happening there. Okay, the second part of what I'm going to talk about is this analysing individual objects. And at English Heritage, I'm fairly confident for preventive conservation, we've dropped our energy use by 40% in the last 10 to 13 years, depending where you start measuring and where you finish. And by really understanding the conditions we need to achieve, not ideal conditions, but what we need to achieve for the collection and ways of improving the efficiency of that. But the other part has been this analysing individual objects within a group that may be very similar to see which ones are stable and unstable. And just to show some examples, this is archaeological copper and iron. And as you can see, it can be extremely unstable. And if we look at the top right, the two copper spoons have very similar composition. They're from the same burial environment, quite close to each other. They've been sat in the same showcase for quite a few years. One of them is very badly corroded. One of them is apparently perfectly stable. And if we can identify which of the objects are stable and unstable, we can then tailor the preventive conservation for them. We obviously need to do something for the bottom spoon, keeping it at very low relative humidity. That's quite intensive in work. The top one, we probably don't need to do anything beyond putting it in a showcase so nobody actually walks off with it. And as I say, we've been working on this for about 25 years, and we found a way that we can measure the deterioration rate by enclosing the object with some silica gel to control the relative humidity and just measuring the oxygen concentration. And if it's deteriorating, it's unstable, the oxygen concentration will drop. We can do it for small objects with glassware or larger objects with Escal bags. And the testing takes about 2 weeks. And having tested now well over 3,000 objects with this, and other groups are working as well, we've got quite a good methodology of doing it. And we know for archaeological iron in English Heritage, about 60% of it's stable, up to 80%. So we really don't need to do anything with environmental control. Of the remaining 40%, most of it follows this red line. If we keep it below 30% RH, it is there is some change, but we think it's acceptable. Some of it's really horrifically bad. The blue line, which starts at 20%, but thankfully not much of the collection. And some of it corrodes, but at higher relative humidities. And we've used that to tailor that testing regime for the materials. And it's all published in the metals paper, you can see. A different example for something where stability is down to the composition. This is quite a famous set of slides for Narn Garbo sculpture. It's cellulose acetate, and pretty much 1 week it was slightly yellowed. The second week, this is what they found in the showcase. So it's very rapid, catastrophic deterioration, as if it's fallen off a cliff. And if we know which polymer, what the main polymer type is, we know to a degree which ones are stable and which ones are unstable. And we have collections that have thousands of polymers in them. This is York Royal Observer Corps bunker. There are, I think, something like 6,000 polymer objects in there. We've been there with portable instrumentation, determined what the main component is for all of them. Now, almost 10,000 objects. A lot of them are stable, or at least much stabler. A number are within these six that we know are problematic: polyurethane, PVC, cellulose acetate, cellulose nitrate, synthetic rubber, natural rubber. We cannot identify, we've not been able to identify a small portion with the portable instrumentation that we have and can easily do that with. This has been written up, and if we use two instruments together, the proportion that we can't ID drops essentially. So as the black bars get much smaller if we use Raman and near infrared, or FTIR and near infrared. And then moving on to the GoGreen materials, glass, about 90% of it, depending on your collection, is pretty stable, and other researchers have said that's quite safe to keep that between 40 and 50%. About 10%, again, can really dramatically decay. And the recommendation is to keep this in a very tight RH band, which is very energy intensive. And we've been doing a bit of work looking at actually about 8 methods to see if we can pick out the unstable material before it starts getting anywhere near this state and apply the preventive conservation to it. We've looked at near infrared spectroscopy, which the Smithsonian's published, FTIR spectroscopy. But the technique we found the best is to actually just swab the surface and look at the concentration of sodium or potassium ions that have come to the surface from the degradation of the glass. And this can be very sensitive. This is a swabbing. We're using a type of swab that was worked on by Gus Verhaar from the Rijksmuseum. Initially, we were using cotton wool swabs. You swab the surface, you take that away. The easiest thing to do is ion chromatography, which some people have. It's quite cheap to buy in if you want to do this. Some museums have specific ion electrodes, etc. And the whole methodology is up on Zenodo in a lot of detail. So if you're lucky enough to have scientists or access to money to do this, you can undertake this yourself with your collection, which is the idea. And then the final thing I'm really going to talk about is stone deterioration, which could easily take up the whole of this webinar. But the presence of soluble salts can be really problematic. And this is a sandstone head from Furness Abbey. And you can see the loss of detail that we've had with this. And as I said, the British Museum, 1970s, they were drilling their stone objects to analyze how much soluble salt was present in there. That's fine for a building, or if you've got a big break surface. Kind of not okay if you have to drill the sculptural surface. And what we've been doing is looking at poulticing as an alternative. But once we've got those salt and ion concentrations, as we see here, we can feed them into a thermodynamic model. This is something that was developed by a European Union project, and it will predict at a particular temperature what happens when we pass certain RH thresholds depending on the concentration of the ions. And you can see somewhere between 70 and 67 for sodium chloride and sodium nitrate, that will occur. And if you do a lot of these calculations at different temperatures, you can build this kind of stability diagram of temperature against relative humidity. The white regions are safe. If your temperature relative humidity starts going across these boundaries, you will get salt activity. And we've compared poulticing with drilling and how it affects those boundaries at different temperatures. And what we found is certainly with a lot of stone, it makes a little bit of difference, but the difference in terms of relative humidity is probably smaller than the error on the instruments we're using in museums to measure it. So we can probably just ignore that difference and go ahead with the poulticing. And then example, much worse example, this is Furness. This is the salt from that Abbott's Head that you saw. And we have very few white regions, and the darker the red, the worse it gets. And if we put the temperature and relative humidity over, you can see we've got, it's bad, but a lot of it is actually still okay. And we've been able to use that to predict what we're going to do with the environment at Furness. Final example, very quickly, because I'm almost out of time. Clays are a real problem in stone, expanding clays. We used to drill, we can ID them that way, but we've been looking at non-invasive infrared spectroscopy, and that actually does work really well for the expanding clays we're worried about. Uh, you may well be thinking this is all very well, but I don't have a portable infrared spectrometer. One recent development is that within the UK, there's this Riches scheme. We've been very lucky to be funded. We've bought a lot of this equipment, and anybody in the UK can apply for us to come and do this kind of analysis on their collection. And to a degree, the ERIS scheme for Europe uh, provides that functionality as well for people who aren't lucky enough to be in a big institution to have scientists and analytical equipment. And I think that is my time up.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dave. I have to say, as a stone conservator, I always get really excited when we start talking about stone because
One
it
of my
typically gets
favorites.
overlooked in these conversations. So it's really exciting to get to yeah, be included, I would say. But I really loved what you said about need over ideal. And I think that as culture professionals, we tend to focus on ideal and perfection, which isn't always necessary. So I think that that's a key takeaway for me for today. So just in the interest of time and to make sure that we get to hear all of Lukasz, I would like to go ahead and turn over to Lukasz now. I will save some time for Q&A at the end of the session, but please, if you have any questions for Dave, go ahead and pop them in the chat. We will have a proper Q&A for both of our speakers at the end, but I just want to make sure that we give proper time for Lukasz because we have some even more interesting things to hear. So Lukasz, I'll turn over to you, and thank you again, Dave.
Thank you very much for the introduction and welcome everyone. Hello, my name is Łukasz Bratasz. I come from much less famous institution, much less famous than English Heritage, which is Jerzy Haber Institute of Polish Academy of Sciences, and I'm head of the Cultural Heritage Research Group. Today, I will not speak about our research, but rather how we try to develop tools which translate research results into practical advices to all professionals working in cultural heritage, to educators, to students, to conservators, and so on. And the platform which we developed, it's called HERI-E. It's Preventive Conservation Platform for Decision Support. It was also developed within the GoGreen project. And today I would like to just say about the new developments and what would be available in the near future. We are also the part of the European research infrastructure for heritage science as a part of the DigiLab. And this development, which the HERI-E was developed with the financial support of many institutions as it is developed for the last 10 years. And the reason why we try to develop and enable professionals to make a more effective decision is that, of course, I think that most of you would agree that developing effective preservation strategy requires identification, which is obvious, but also quantitative assessment impact of various processes on cultural heritage properties and loss of the values of those properties. And just an example, this is the part of the famous ASHRAE chapter about the design of the climate control for the museums, libraries, galleries, and archives. And as you can see here, this process is quite complex. We start with the understanding of the context of the mission, strategy of the institution, financial constraints, the law, the political environment in which museum is located. Also, we need to determine the needs and current environment. And when we go, we need to overview the risk and so on. This process is quite complex. When you look at this part of the scheme, you can see how many people, how different actors are involved in this process. If we replace the word in this process environment to the situation, I think it applies to many conservation decisions in the field of the preventive conservation. Actually, the quantitative evaluation of risk and the data crunching is present in many steps. First of all, if you want to overview the risk, you need to calculate something. You need to calculate, as Dave showed, for example, the recession rate or tarnishing rate of your silver object. If you want to set the criteria and evaluate if your strategy was implemented efficiently, you also need to define that in the quantitative way. And of course, at the end, or not at the end, but at a certain point, you need to review option and see which solution is more efficient. That's why the HARRY-E platform has been developed. HARRY-E stands for HARRY, like heritage, E like e-commerce, HARRY-E, and it's freely available for everyone at this website, which is harrye.pl. And the website and the software is administered and managed by my group. It wouldn't be possible to develop this kind of the platform with the support, with the contribution from many institutions. And as I said, I'm from the Jerzy Haber Institute, and we somehow initiated development of the platform, but also Canadian Conservation Institute, University College London, University of Ljubljana, English Heritage, and the Getty Conservation Institute. The platform, the structure of the platform reflects the structure of 10 agents of deterioration, like incorrect relative humidity, incorrect temperature, fire, criminals, and so on. Those agents which are highlighted with the brighter color, already for those agents, we have some modules which can evaluate, which can help us to evaluate the risk. So usually the platform is used in unsupervised way. So you just register and you use the platform, you can upload and process your environmental data. The environmental data which could be uploaded are temperature and relative humidity, as well the light intensity data. You can also merge two data sets to reflect or to simulate the situation when the object goes for loan and you move it from one environment to another. So far, we have several modules which are available for the user, like mechanical damage to environmental variation to restrained wood, which is in practice, this is very frequently a furniture. Panel painting, we added recently the crack density, so the user selects the type of the wood, the thickness of wood, and also crack density. We have the tool which evaluates the risk of mechanical damage to parchment as well. For chemical degradation, already the damage functions or the risk modules existed for paper, general materials, and cellulose acetate. And recently, we added a new model which allows to calculate the chemical degradation of PVC. There is a fire module. We can predict the user can predict the indoor concentration of damaging gaseous pollutants from external sources based on the monitoring outdoor. There are two light damage calculators, the classical one and the new refined version, which has the database of 108 textile dyes, synthetic textile dyes. We added the showcase tool within the GoGreen project, and we developed automatic ASHRAE categorization and reporting. So when you upload your climatic data, automatically you know what type of the climate control according to ASHRAE specification you have and why you have such and such type of the climate control. In very near future, there will be new tools available, like full finite element modeling of the mechanical damage. The current module allows for very quick evaluation of the risk, but it's simplified, and we are adding the new module. You will be able to simulate using finite element module your object, like canvas painting or panel paintings, and we are adding the visualization of the cracking of the risk, how the risk could be interpreted in terms of the crack densification. And we are also adding the large wooden object, like which is important risk to, for example, wooden sculptures. The model is adopted to hot and humid climate, which means the material properties depends not only on the humidity, relative humidity, but also on temperature. So far, when you use the heavy E, the risk to humid and hot climate is significantly overestimated by the heavy E. We are adding also to light damage calculate the database of modern inks, and we will have the metal corrosion for steel, silver, and copper, as Dave showed. Also the glass corrosion and the training module for educators and the didactic materials will be available. And maybe a little bit later, we will add also the module allowing to calculate the soiling rate of the surface by indoor particle pollutants. So the full finite element modeling would be implemented with the COMSOL multi-physics software. As I mentioned, 3 types of the object would be available, and like canvas painting, panel paintings, and so on. So for the panel paintings, what user do, the user uploads the climate he wants to, or he or she wants to evaluate. And here you can see the examples, and this data set would be uploaded to the software, and the risk would be calculated. The risk would be calculated for the panel paintings made of 4 different wood species. So you can select from the poplar, oak, pine, and limewood. You can select the type of the cut of the wood, tangential, radial, gesso thickness. Gesso in this case represents the paint layer. There will be also option to select different panel thicknesses for the panel paint, for the panels, and distance between cracks. Also the humidity, type of the how humidity is calculated, and type of the diffusion. So as a result, and this is already what you have, you obtain some numbers, but these numbers are expressed in terms of the strain, but there is a long way between strain and actual loss of the value of the culture of the object. And here you can see, for example, you have 2 situations, 2 type of the object, and 1 object significantly reach and go beyond the critical level of the strain, which was determined in mechanical experiments with the gesso layer. But what actually it means for the object? We collaborate with Professor James O'Brien from the Berkeley University, who developed the software to simulate the crack patterns, different crack patterns. And we use this software, which we also correlated with the stresses experienced in paintings. And you can see here how the database of different craquelure patterns was developed. So we have the database for many craquelure patterns. So when you calculate the strain, you will obtain the information about typical crack density. This information would be then applied to visualize on the actual painting. So far, we will use the painting which we proposed. This is not actually this painting which you can see here, but in the future, the user would be able to upload his or her painting, and the cracks would be, and the damage would be visualized depending on the submitted climate. And this is, for example, one of the examples. This is, of course, work in progress, but the output would be not only the strain, not only the number, but also some visualization on the real painting. For canvas painting, this is much more complicated because the canvas models are much larger, and if you would like to calculate the stresses in canvas models for entire yearly climate, we would have to calculate the risk for few weeks. This is just impossible. So this situation is a little bit different. So from the climate uploaded, only the maximum relative humidity and minimum relative humidity would be selected, and also the user will have the option to select the geometry of the painting, also some characteristic of the stretcher or the frame of the bars, wooden bars which were used, and again the orientation of the canvas in the painting and thickness of the gesso layer. As a result, the user will obtain some information about the stresses in the painting. Actually, here you have an example where we calculated the deformation stresses in a painting when relative humidity dropped from 90 to 20%, so extremely high relative humidity variation. And you will have the information about the area which is endangered by the cracking. Actually, we found that still this one model is calculated for 7 hours on our large server. So we simplify that so the user will get the information in time shorter than 1 hour. And this simplification was possible. Some features are lost because we are just decreasing number of elements, but still in general terms, the user will have the information about the risk. The third model, which would be deployed on the platform, on the HARRY platform, is the model which allows the user to calculate risk to the massive object due to the dynamic relative humidity variation. Here you can see the image from the basilica in Krakow with the largest medieval wooden altar in Europe, and you can see that sculptures could be extremely large, and the height of them could be 4 meters, and the diameter of the sculpture is around 1 meter. But the sculptures could be also very small. So again, user will have to select the dimensions of the sculpture. This issue actually is, in our opinion, very important because the opinions or the recommendations regarding the fast humidity variation or the heating episodes in the historical sites or buildings are very different. For example, German Association of Restorers suggests that the humidity variation or heating should be very slow and changes no faster than 2 Celsius degrees per day, whereas National Trust or Danish standards, they advise that churches or the historical buildings should be heated quickly. And to solve this problem, we developed this model. As a result, I will not tell you the truth. Probably some of you who have heard the presentation of my colleague Magda, my PhD student, she already answered the question, who is right? But I have to say that some of these organizations are right and some are wrong. So what the user will obtain, it will obtain the information about the possible crack propagation and crack development in the sculpture, and the fracture mechanics approach would be used, and the user will obtain the information about parameter which is called strain energy release rate. If the strain energy release rate reaches the critical value for material, like for the lime wood, which is 200 newtons per meter, then the cracking will happen. But actually, this is the climate which was recorded in the basilica in Krakow, and we subjected the object, the large sculpture, to this virtual calculation. As you can see here, that even the climate is not stable, but there is no risk of damage development in those sculptures. And as Dave mentioned, we have the damage functions for silver, for the corrosion rate of silver and copper. We are still waiting for the function for the steel, and it would be available also for the users on the HARRY platform, let's say in the couple of months until the end of the GoGreen project. The main dissemination way of the HARRY platform are workshops. We already organized several workshops. Recently, we have 2 workshops in London with more than 45 participants, and new workshops are coming. The next one would be in Sarajevo between 22nd and 23rd of April, but also the other workshops are planned, and definitely there will be one workshop on ICOM-CC. So if you want to participate and learn more about the HARRY platform with the workshops, hands-on exercises, please join us during the workshop. The workshops would be also available. You can apply for workshop through the ERIC's website as a part of the service to your institution. This effort or this dissemination allowed us to build a large community of the users. We have already more than 4,000 registered accounts on the HARRY platform, and in total more than 500,000 of calculations were performed. So I would say we are very proud. We didn't expect that there is so many people interested in preventive conservation in the world, but the community is growing, and the main users are conservators, heritage scientists, and educators. Caitlin, over to you. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Lukasz. And I think it's sometimes maybe difficult to understand the impact of what you gentlemen do, because it really is such a big topic right now. And you say you're surprised at all of the interest in this, but I'm not. I'm actually very sure that everyone who is watching this video is actively on the HARRY platform, registering an account and excited to put it to use. So just a huge thank you for that.
Thank you.
So we have just a few minutes here for questions and answers. So if you have any questions for our speakers, please feel free to pop them in the chat. I actually did have a question. I always love being the moderator because I get to be the selfish one to get my questions answered. But Lukasz, you were talking a little bit about the variation and recommendations of guidelines. And that's something that I've seen a lot as well. And not just variations, but in what the guidelines say, but variations in interpretation of the guidelines. And this is a question for both Dave and Lukasz. Who's right? You mentioned who's right, but what are the realities of these variations, and what is really best practice when it comes to RH and temperature swings?
So Dave, do you want to take over?
Well,
You can
I
start.
will answer that looking maybe a little bit towards the future, Caitlin.
Perfect.
As you say, it's a very complex issue. The objects are massively variable, and their responses we know something about, but not a lot. But we're on the kind of edge of being able to measure this damage in situ at a small enough level that we can pick it up. It's great we get conservators doing assessments and looking at the objects year on year, but things have to change a lot before that will be picked up. But some of the methods we now got access to, acoustic emission, some of the stuff for chemical degradation, are getting very sensitive, and we're at the point we can pick up the early signs of damage in situ in our complex environments, and hopefully with enough work like that, we'll begin to get to the bottom of which recommendations actually are absolutely needed, which ones are maybe a little bit over the top for that group of objects. So I've not really answered your question, but
No, that's okay. I wasn't expecting that. Go ahead, Lukasz.
Maybe I will try, because I have more courageous opinion than Dave. I think that objects are less at risk than people previously thought. That's no doubt about that. And objects which of course are acclimatized to unstable climate, they are stable, and it's very difficult to detect any damage development. And there are of course exceptions for that. And those objects, as Dave said, need to be identified. And those objects are, first of all, the objects after very strong conservation. When you erase the past memory, they are new objects, which they are probably not majority in our collections, but also the objects which undergo chemical degradation. And actually, there are examples that very small variation of humidity or can cause damage if there is a progress of for example, chemical changes or drying of the oil paints. And there are modern paintings which crack from, in one day they are in good condition, and after a year or two you discover the big cracks. But the relative humidity cannot be blamed for that. It's just the natural aging or glass or enamel and so on. I'm in opinion that chemical degradation is more important than physical due to unstable environment.
I very much appreciate you saying that and the transparency around it. I think that, one of the things that I always talk about with temperature and relative humidity is that we focus on it so much because we feel we can control it. HVAC systems give us a mechanism where there are so many other elements that are actually maybe more risky that we don't feel like we have control over. But one thing that really stuck with me that both of you talked about is this idea of natural degradation or managing change. And I think that we have this idea that by keeping an object in a perfect environment, it will never change. But that's not the reality. And maybe what we're thinking about is not necessarily, I mean, it's very much what Dave was saying. It's not necessarily about preventing anything from happening, but it's about managing that change and deciding at what rate is acceptable. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's acceptable rates is very complex, and it's not.
Mm.
We for some things we can measure the rates for you. And one of the frightening thing about being a scientist, is we now have tools. I can pretty much guarantee I can show you change on almost any object in any environment if I start looking at it with an AFM or TEM or whatever. But it's the acceptability thing, and I mean I think the furthest we've got with this is a good discussion with our curatorial colleagues and the conservators about what's important in the object and what of the changes impact that value.
Yeah.
Because science is very good at the crack's going to get 2 millimeters longer in 15 years, but how important is that? That's something for the whole field, I feel.
Yeah, it's a good point, Lukasz.
And I think that maybe this discussion about the global range of humidity variation of temperature will one day will disappear because we know that, of course, there is a progress in development of the renewable energies, and already we are developing the cold storage for the Film Institute in Poland. When we use energy, because it has enough thermal inertia, we use energy only when it's produced from green sources. And in this case, we can freeze object and the environmental impact is not so large. Also, I have to say, or not so large, it's small. Also, I have to say that for this storage, we found that building the storage would produce 10 times more carbon footprint than just using energy for 50 years. So the climate control, we need to be reasonable. Probably it won't be in future as important as it is now. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't look and use the resources in the responsible way. But I think that maybe future will bring us the solutions.
Well, I mean, I think that's a very optimistic opinion. Sorry, Dave, you wanted to add
I
on
was
to
say,
that.
hopefully in terms of environmental impact, but I don't see the electricity becoming any cheaper.
That's a
And I
really
think there's
good point.
economic sustainability for
But
substitution.
to say, because we are discussing about the vulnerability of the materials, but the truth is that belief that HVAC system can deliver you a stable environment is also not true. I haven't seen any stable environment in Poland, even institution which invested and bought, installed their large HVAC system. It's just not gonna happen. So it's this dilemma probably is a little bit, I would say, false alternative. Stable with HVAC or unstable natural.
I- yeah, sorry, Dave, go ahead.
No, I was
Yeah.
agreeing.
No, it's true. And it's actually so interesting that you say that because even Gary Thompson knew that an HVAC system could not deliver a stable environment, which is why he put the plus or minus in there. That was not the range of safety. That was what was reasonably expected the HVAC system could do. It's never going to be set point because you can't control a building like that, especially when you have visitors coming in and out. So I want to wrap up today. I have not prepped you guys for this, so I'm going to totally put you on the spot, and I hope that's okay. But I wanted to share my most controversial opinion and get your guys' input on this. So both of you work with historic houses and climate controlled environments. And we know about proof fluctuations. We know that if an object has been in a specific environment, then any damage that would have happened has probably already occurred. So, the ranges that you were talking about, Lukasz, with, 20 to 80% relative humidity for something that's 1,000 years old, that's normal. It's used to it. It's comfortable with that. So I'm wondering is what I'm wondering, and this kind of goes back to what we're talking about with HVAC systems maybe not being the solution for the future, not just because of not being able to provide stable environments, but because of the rate at which they're breaking down. I mean, we saw, what happened in Brazil when the HVAC system caught fire and burned down half the museum. So, and I'm talking with more and more museums that are experiencing system failures. Their chillers are going, they're getting spikes because their systems are not able to maintain the ideal conditions that they're trying to maintain because of climate change and what's happening outside. And because we're experiencing more and more extreme conditions, both in terms of temperature and relative humidity, not just the catastrophes that we're seeing in terms of flooding and fires, we are actually putting our objects more at risk by contributing to climate change. So here's my question for you in the form of a very controversial opinion. In terms of protecting our objects from climate change, especially those in historic houses or in non-climatized environments, would it be a thought to actually, instead of trying to maintain tighter and tighter, more perfect ranges, to try and very gradually and risk-free acclimate our objects to what we're going to be seeing as future conditions? So wider ranges? As I said, I'm totally putting you on the spot here.
Mm,
Some of our properties have pretty wide ranges already. We've kind of been running that experiment for, well,
so,
we've been running it for hundreds of years
There
because
we
there
go.
was
but,
no HVAC pre 19,
but you know,
1920s or whatever.
Katrin, I will deviate a little bit from your question, but I
Sure.
have a similar or problem, or we are working now, and we are trying to understand if the objects which were stored in the perfect environment, stable environment, are not at higher risk finally due to the chemical changes. And it seems, I cannot, it's unofficial, but it seems that when the objects are exposed to environmental variation, the paint, I'm sorry, I'm talking about paintings, the paint
Yes.
layers cracks and the crackles develop. If they don't develop, when there is a shrinkage due to evolution of oil paints, the
Mhm.
stresses builds up and they delaminate. So the cracking prevents from delamination. If you, the hypothesis on which we are working on, sorry, I know that I shouldn't throw a bomb to the grenade to the discussion,
Bring it on. I love
but
it.
maybe the stable environment is not better for the paintings or modern paintings. Maybe unstable cause the cracking but prevents from delamination.
I love this. See, this is what I think is, we need to actually start thinking, moving away from following rigid guidelines on the back of a textbook and start thinking more contextually. Because one of the things that I really did take away from both of your presentations today is that every object is different. There is no perfect one size fits all. There is no guideline that is going to be applicable for everything. There's material science, there's chemical degradation, there's temperature and relative humidity. But actually, what is best practice is context, and it's case by
But
case.
Caitlin, I think I'm scientist. I try to find the regularities, and the same as each patient is different. But finally, if you have a COVID, you need to identify what are the risk groups and who is safe, who is not safe, and you need to find the regularities. This is what we are trying to do.
Well,
Saying that each object is different doesn't help.
okay, well, I think we can find a happy medium here because I think you're absolutely right, and I love the analogy of looking at objects like people because of course there are classifications and we need guidelines. We need to understand in terms of, we need to understand what general, yeah, what we might see in a more general sphere. But I think that, it is also really difficult to say wooden objects are always going to behave like this. And maybe that's the case in Poland, but maybe that's not the case in Brazil, for example. So, but I mean, not in any way, shape, or form to deter or detract from what you're doing, because I think that that's so necessary. And as I said at the very beginning, everyone is looking to you guys for solutions on this. And the more information that we have as conservators and as practicing professionals, the more informed, empowered we feel to make the right decisions. And that's really what this is all about, is, figuring out what is best for our context based on material science, based on the history of the collections, the type of collections, based on our context, and based on what the needs are. So I would very much agree with that, and I thank you. Gentlemen, do you have any last words of advice or wisdom for our audience before I let you enjoy the rest of your evenings? Dave, please
It's
kick us
in
off.
no way advice, but I'm just responding to Justine's question
Oh,
on
great.
the chat, which is how can using heavy help convince institutions don't have HVAC that
I'm
passively
sorry, I didn't.
may be a
Oh, yeah, no, my
beneficial
apologies.
alternative to introducing HVAC. I mean, I think the thing with heavy is, you know, certainly for some materials, you can show that with the environment you've got, it's good enough. You don't need to introduce HVAC, which has obvious economic and building fabric issues, if you've got a historic building. But I think the only way to convince people really is more and more case studies about
Mhm.
the drawbacks of HVAC when it's breaking down, and people being brave enough to say, we had this system, it worked great for 300 days a year, but for 30 days a
But
year,
but Harry somehow maybe somehow can support this information because the crackler patterns, or when you specify what's the density of cracks in your painting, if you show that crack paintings are safe, and Harry is showing that when you have the cracks, the objects are safer, just simply, and we can quantify that. So the previous environmental variation, they were developed on the assumption that we have virgin new object and we are looking for the first crack or damage initiation. This doesn't fly anymore. You have a lot of flaws and defects in your object, and if you include that information to the modeling, now actually it's quite difficult to damage object, even virtually in HARE.
Fabulous. No, and I think that's another key takeaway, is that, our objects are actually a little bit more robust than we might give them credit for. So I appreciate you sharing that. Fantastic. Yes. Well, a huge thank you. Unfortunately, we're out of time. You guys know that I love this, so I could talk for another 3 hours with you both. But a huge, huge thank you for sharing all of your expertise, for being willing to talk about things that are sometimes a little bit scary, and more importantly, for your leadership in this space. I think as we're all moving towards more sustainable practices from a social perspective, from an environmental perspective, as well as from a financial perspective, these types of conversations need to happen more and more. So, a huge thank you to everyone for joining us today. As mentioned, the recording will be made available on the Go Green website and the Go Green YouTube channel. Follow along for more information, and we look forward to continued conversations with both David and Lukasz. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much, everyone. Have a great evening. Have a great day.
Bye.